On a bitterly cold winter night, Jacob Walker, a quiet man burdened by his struggle to speak, found himself face to face with desperation. At the door of a crumbling warehouse lay a frail golden retriever mother and her tiny puppies, trembling in the snow. Unable to form the words, Jacob whispered a broken prayer. L, Lord, H, help me. Was it mere chance that brought Jacob to them, or was it God's grace guiding him to this moment? Could a man who struggled to express himself become the voice of hope for these helpless lives? Stay with us for a story of faith, resilience, and the boundless love of God. The streets of Maple Hollow were blanketed in snow, silencing the town under its icy grip. Jacob Walker, a 45-year-old mechanic, trudged home from the garage where he spent most of his days. His breath hung in the freezing air, curling into faint clouds before dissipating. Since the accident years ago that left him with aphasia, a condition that impaired his ability to express thoughts into words, Jacob had grown accustomed to a quieter, more solitary life. He spoke in short, halting phrases and avoided conversations when he could. Gestures and brief nods became his language, leaving little room for deeper connections. The shortcut past the abandoned warehouses was part of his daily routine. The buildings, once vital to the town's industry, now stood as hollowed-out relics, their steel skeletons rusted and weathered. Jacob's boots crunched on the snow-covered path as the cold wind bit through his coat. He was lost in thought, eager to get back to his modest home, when he heard it, a faint, muffled whimper. Jacob stopped, his breath catching. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the wind, but unmistakable. He turned toward its source, his brow furrowing in concern. Slowly, he raised the flashlight he carried, its beam cutting through the darkness as he scanned the area. The sound came again, weaker this time, pulling him toward the largest of the warehouses. He hesitated, glancing at the darkened structure. Its walls were crumbling, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. Rust streaked the metal doors, one of which hung slightly ajar. Jacob's hand tightened on the flashlight as he stepped forward, pushing the door open with a low groan of metal on metal. The air inside was bitterly cold, the concrete floor uneven and strewn with debris. Puddles of melted snow reflected the faint light from his flashlight. Then in the far corner of the room he saw them. A frail golden retriever lay curled on the frozen floor, her matted coat clinging to her emaciated frame. Surrounding her were 6 tiny puppies, their small bodies trembling as they huddled close for warmth. The mother lifted her head weakly, her brown eyes locking onto Jacob's. Despite her exhaustion, her gaze held a flicker of hope, silent and pleading. Jacob froze, his chest tightening. His flashlight wavered as he knelt down, lowering the beam to avoid startling her. The puppies stirred faintly, their soft whimpers tugging at his heart. For a moment, he simply stared, his mind racing. He didn't know the first thing about caring for dogs, let alone a starving mother and her vulnerable pups. But as he met the mother's eyes again, his thoughts quieted. Something deeper stirred within him, an unmistakable call to act. "Oh, Lord," he whispered, his voice halting and broken. "Help me, help them." The mother dog let out a faint whine, her head sinking back onto the concrete. Jacob set the flashlight down, its beam casting a soft glow around them, and shrugged off his heavy coat. The cold bit at his arms, but he ignored it, carefully draping the jacket over the mother and her pups. She stirred slightly beneath the warmth, but didn't resist, her eyes never leaving his. Kneeling beside her, Jacob rummaged through his bag and pulled out the remains of his lunch, a half-eaten sandwich. He tore it into small pieces and extended one toward her. "Eat," he whispered, his voice soft but uneven. The mother dog sniffed the food, her nose twitching before she hesitantly took the piece from his hand. She chewed slowly, her movements lethargic. Encouraged, Jacob placed the rest of the sandwich closer to her, watching as she ate each bite with visible effort. The puppies stirred again, one letting out a soft cry as it squirmed closer to its mother. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his breath escaping in shaky bursts. "What do I do now?" He didn't have supplies or the knowledge to care for a family of dogs, but leaving them here wasn't an option. Not in this cold, not when they were so fragile. He sighed heavily and began formulating a plan. Reaching into his bag, Jacob carefully lifted the first puppy, its small, trembling body fitting easily in his hand. He gently placed it inside the bag, lining the bottom with a spare scarf. One by one, he transferred the pups, their tiny whimpers echoing faintly in the empty warehouse. The mother dog lifted her head, her eyes filled with worry, as Jacob approached her. "I'll take care of them," he murmured, his voice trembling. "And you." Sliding his arms under her frail body, Jacob lifted the mother dog, cradling her against his chest. She was alarmingly light, her ribs pressing against his arms. Adjusting the bag on his shoulder, Jacob rose to his feet, his knees shaking slightly from the strain. The puppies let out soft cries, but their mother's weak gaze reassured him that he was doing the right thing. The journey home was slow and arduous. Snow began to fall again, swirling around Jacob as he trudged through the desolate streets. His breath came in heavy bursts, his boots sinking into the deepening snow. He glanced down at the mother dog in his arms, her body trembling slightly despite the warmth of his coat. The weight of her trust pressed heavily on his heart, but it also gave him strength. When Jacob finally reached his modest home, he kicked the door open with his boot and stepped inside. The warmth of the room was a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. He set the mother dog down gently on an old blanket he pulled from the closet, then carefully placed the puppies beside her. The mother stirred weakly, her nose nudging each of her pups as they nestled close to her for warmth. Jacob stood over them, his breath still heavy, his hands trembling from a mix of exhaustion and emotion. He had done what he could to get them here, but now an even bigger challenge loomed. He glanced around his small home. There was no dog food, no medical supplies, no plan. His inexperience and limitations weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't give up, not when their lives depended on him. Running a hand through his hair, Jacob muttered to himself, "I don't know how, but I'll try." He sank into a chair nearby, his eyes fixed on the fragile family before him. The mother dog closed her eyes, her breathing slow and steady as her pups squirmed against her. Jacob folded his hands, bowing his head. He whispered a silent prayer, his words faltering but filled with sincerity. "Help me, Lord, help them!" As the cold night pressed on, Jacob felt the faint stirrings of hope. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was determined to see it through. One step at a time, one act of kindness, one prayer. And so it began. Jacob Walker sat cross-legged on the floor of his modest home, his brows furrowed in concentration as he tried to figure out what to do next. The frail golden retriever, now wrapped in an old blanket, lay curled up on the floor with her 6 tiny puppies pressed against her. Their faint whimpers filled the silence, mingling with the occasional gust of wind that rattled the windows. Jacob's heart ached as he watched the mother dog weakly nuzzle her pups, doing everything she could to keep them warm despite her obvious exhaustion. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. He had never owned a dog before, let alone cared for a starving mother and her litter. He glanced around his sparse living room, the absence of anything remotely useful glaringly obvious. His kitchen held no food suitable for dogs, and his small collection of old towels and blankets felt woefully inadequate. Sorry," he muttered softly, his words halting and uneven, as always. I don't know what to do." The mother dog's eyes flickered open briefly at the sound of his voice, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, it seemed as though she understood, as though she trusted him despite his awkwardness. Jacob felt a lump rise in his throat. He had brought them here, but now he had no idea how to keep them alive. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders. Jacob rubbed his hands together nervously as he stared at his phone. He wasn't good with words even on his best days, and asking for help over the phone was an especially daunting task. But he didn't have a choice. These dogs needed more than he could provide, and he knew only one person who might be able to help. Lyra Hale, his neighbor a few houses down, was known around town for her love of animals. A talented photographer, Lyra often took pictures of stray or rescued animals to help them find homes. Though Jacob had only spoken to her a handful of times, he had seen her kindness in action, offering food to a stray cat, helping a bird with a broken wing. If anyone could help him now, it was her. Taking a deep breath, Jacob picked up his phone and dialed her number. The line rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Hello, Jacob?" Lyra's tone was light, but there was a note of surprise in her voice. Jacob rarely called anyone. Jacob hesitated, his hand gripping the phone tightly. Forming sentences was always a struggle, but he forced himself to push through. Lyra, he stammered, his voice strained and halting. "I need help. Show me 6 puppies." There was a pause on the other end. "Wait, Jacob," Lyra said, her voice soft but urgent. "Are you saying there's a mother dog and puppies with you? What's going on?" "Found them," Jacob said, his words coming slowly. "In warehouse. Cold. Sick." Lyra didn't hesitate. "I'll be right there. Don't worry, Jacob. I'm bringing supplies." Less than 30 minutes later, a knock sounded at Jacob's door. He opened it to find Lyra standing on his porch, her arms full of bags. Her auburn hair was tucked beneath a knit hat, and her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold. "Jacob," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Where are they?" Jacob gestured toward the blanket where the mother dog and her puppies lay. Lyra's eyes softened as she knelt down beside them, setting her bags aside. She reached out carefully, her movements gentle, and stroked the mother dog's head. "Oh, you poor thing," Lyra murmured. She looked up at Jacob. "She's severely malnourished. Have you given her anything to eat?" Sandwich, Jacob replied awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's all?" Lyra gave him a small smile. "That's a good start. Let me see what I've got." From her bags, Lyra pulled out a container of soft dog food, a small bowl, and a bottle of water. She mixed the food with a bit of water to make it easier for the mother dog to eat, then set the bowl down in front of her. The dog sniffed hesitantly before lapping at the food, her tail giving a weak wag. "Good girl," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with encouragement. While the mother dog ate, Lyra turned her attention to the puppies. She gently examined each one, checking their eyes, paws, and tiny bellies. Jacob watched her work, feeling both relief and inadequacy. She moved with confidence and care, clearly knowing what she was doing. "These little ones are lucky you found them," Lyra said, glancing up at Jacob. "They're weak, but they'll be okay with some proper care." Jacob nodded, his jaw tightening. "Didn't know what to do." Lyra stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing, Jacob. You brought them out of the cold. That's the most important thing." Over the next few hours, Lyra helped Jacob set up a makeshift space for the dogs in his living room. She laid down old blankets and towels, creating a soft, warm nest for the mother dog and her pups. She showed Jacob how to mix formula for the puppies, explaining that they were old enough to start eating soft food, but still needed a bit of extra help. Jacob tried to follow her instructions, but his hands were clumsy and his movements hesitant. At one point, as he attempted to pour the formula into a tiny bowl, some of it spilled onto the floor. Sorry," he muttered, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Lyra chuckled lightly. "It's okay, Jacob, you're learning. Besides, they won't mind a little mess." Jacob offered a small, grateful smile. He was used to feeling out of place in situations like this, but Lyra's easygoing demeanor put him at ease. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't facing a challenge alone. As the evening wore on, the mother dog, whom Lyra suggested naming Solace, began to show signs of improvement. She finished her bowl of food and even managed to lift her head to nuzzle one of her pups. Jacob watched her with a sense of quiet awe, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. "You're strong," he whispered to her, his words halting but filled with sincerity. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes warm. "So are you, Jacob." Before leaving, Lyra packed up her bags and gave Jacob a list of things he would need to pick up for Solace and the puppies. More food, a few feeding bottles, and vitamins to help Solace regain her strength. She also promised to return the next day to check on them. As she stood in the doorway, she turned back to Jacob. "You're doing a good thing, Jacob. Not everyone would have stopped to help them. That takes heart." Jacob looked down, his words catching in his throat. Finally he managed, "Thank you." Lyra smiled. "We'll take care of them together." As Jacob closed the door behind her, he looked back at Solace and her pups, now resting peacefully in their makeshift nest. He still felt overwhelmed, but for the first time since finding them, he also felt a glimmer of confidence. With Lyra's help and a bit of faith, he believed he might just be able to save them. The days after Solace's rescue were filled with hard work and uncertainty for Jacob Walker. His small living room had become a makeshift shelter, and though clumsy in his efforts, Jacob poured his heart into caring for the fragile family. He cleaned up after the puppies, fed Solace the best he could, and constantly checked on their comfort. Lyra Hale, his neighbor, was often there to lend her expertise and provide supplies. However, as the days passed, Jacob began to notice something troubling. One morning, as Jacob filled Solace's bowl with food, she didn't move. Normally, the sound of food would make her lift her head, her nose twitching with interest. But this time, she lay still, her breathing shallow and labored. Her eyes, once tired but hopeful, had dulled, and her frail body trembled under the blanket Jacob had given her. "Solace," Jacob said softly, crouching beside her. His voice, slow and halting as always, carried his concern. "You okay?" The golden retriever let out a weak whimper, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. Jacob felt panic rising in his chest. He placed a hand on her head and realized her body felt far warmer than it should. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Grabbing his phone, Jacob called Lyra. His fingers trembled as he waited for her to answer. "Jacob." Lyra's voice was calm but curious. "Lyra," Jacob stammered, his words slow and uneven. "Solace, she's sick. Come, please." Lyra didn't hesitate. "I'll be there right away." Lyra arrived within 20 minutes, her bag of supplies slung over her shoulder. She knelt beside Solace, her hands moving gently as she examined the dog. Jacob watched anxiously, his fingers twisting together as Lyra checked Solace's gums, her breathing, and her temperature. After a few moments, Lyra looked up, her expression grave. "Jacob, I think Solace has parvovirus. It's a highly contagious and dangerous disease, especially for dogs in her condition." Jacob blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. Parvo?" he asked, struggling with the unfamiliar word. Lyra nodded. "It's serious. Without immediate treatment, she might not survive. She needs a vet." Jacob's chest tightened. He had already spent the last of his savings on supplies for the dogs. The thought of expensive veterinary treatment felt overwhelming. He glanced at Solace, her frail body shivering beneath the blanket, and then at her puppies who were huddled close to her. He couldn't give up on them. Not now. "What do I do?" Jacob asked, his voice trembling. Lyra placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way. Don't worry, you're not alone." That evening, Jacob sat at his small dining table, staring at the phone in his hands. He had never been one to ask for help, not even when he needed it most. Speaking to others was difficult, and he often avoided it. But this time he had no choice. Solace's life depended on it. Jacob closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer. "Lord, guide me." The next morning, Jacob walked to the church at the center of Maple Hollow. Snow fell heavily, blanketing the streets in white, as he rehearsed what he would say. His words were never clear or easy, but he knew he had to try. When he entered the warm sanctuary, the familiar faces of the congregation turned to greet him. Pastor Bennett approached him, his kind eyes filled with curiosity. "Jacob, good to see you. Is everything all right?" Jacob hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously. "Pastor," he began, his words faltering, "the dog, sick, needs help." Though his sentences were fragmented, the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Pastor Bennett listened patiently as Jacob explained the situation as best he could, his halting phrases laced with desperation. When Jacob finished, the pastor placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll help, Jacob," he said gently. "You're not alone." Word spread quickly through the close-knit community. By the end of the day, donations had started to pour in, cash, supplies, even offers to assist with the puppies. Lyra posted photos of Solace and her puppies on social media, explaining their dire need for urgent medical care. The response was overwhelming, with people from neighboring towns reaching out to contribute. Jacob was stunned by the outpouring of support. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but seeing so many people rallying to save Solace filled him with gratitude. One evening, as Jacob sat beside Solace, gently stroking her head, Lyra entered the room with an envelope in her hand. Her face was lit with relief. "Jacob," she said, her voice warm. "We did it. We've raised enough for her treatment." Jacob stared at her, his eyes widening. Really?" he stammered, his voice breaking with emotion. Lyra nodded. "The community came through for you and for her." Jacob's hands trembled as he managed a quiet, heartfelt, "Thank you." The next morning, Jacob and Lyra brought Solace to the nearest veterinary clinic. The puppies stayed behind with a trusted neighbor, wrapped in warm blankets. Jacob sat anxiously in the waiting room, his leg bouncing nervously as Lyra sat beside him, offering quiet reassurance. The vet confirmed Lyra's suspicion Solace had parvovirus. The treatment would be intensive, involving intravenous fluids, medications, and constant care. The prognosis was cautious but hopeful, given how quickly they had acted. Jacob listened intently, his hands gripping his knees. When the vet finished explaining, Jacob nodded, his resolve firm. "Do it," he said slowly. "Whatever it takes." The days that followed were difficult. Solace remained at the clinic, fighting through her treatment, while Jacob and Lyra focused on caring for the puppies. Jacob missed Solace's quiet presence in the house, but he took comfort in knowing she was receiving the care she needed. A week later, the clinic called with good news. Solace was responding well to treatment and could come home soon. When Jacob arrived to pick her up, his heart swelled at the sight of her. Though still thin and weak, her eyes were brighter and her tail wagged faintly when she saw him. "Welcome home," Jacob whispered as he lifted her gently into his arms. Though the road to recovery would be long, Jacob felt a renewed sense of hope. With Lyra's help and the support of the community, he believed they could give Solace and her puppies the second chance they deserved. Solace returned home frail but alive, her golden coat still dull and her steps tentative. Yet as Jacob Walker carried her into his modest house, her tail wagged faintly, a flicker of gratitude shining in her tired eyes. The puppies, bundled in warm blankets, greeted their mother with high-pitched squeaks, tumbling over one another in their excitement. Solace weakly nuzzled each of them, her maternal instincts refusing to wane despite her exhaustion. For Jacob, seeing Solace reunited with her pups was a balm for the worry and stress that had gripped him over the past week. Though the road to recovery would be long, the glimmer of hope in Solace's demeanor gave him renewed strength. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Jacob and Lyra Hale, his neighbor and newfound ally, worked tirelessly to care for Solace and her 6 pups. Lyra's visits became a daily ritual, her warmth and expertise a source of comfort to Jacob, who still stumbled through the intricacies of raising a canine family. One evening, as the puppies rolled and tumbled across the blanket-covered floor, Lyra suggested they give them names. "They're starting to show their personalities," Lyra said, sitting cross-legged on the floor as she gently scooped up one of the puppies. "This little one is so calm, always watching the others. I think she should be Grace." Jacob, sitting awkwardly beside her, nodded. Grace," he repeated slowly, testing the word. One by one, the puppies earned their names. The smallest, who always seemed to stay close to Solace, was named Hope. The most adventurous pup, constantly attempting to climb over the blanket's edges, was dubbed Valor. The one who seemed happiest, wagging her tiny tail even in sleep, became Bliss. A shy pup, who often curled up in the corner but watched the others with curious eyes, was named Faith. The last pup, whose coat shimmered faintly in the light, was named Halo. "They're perfect names," Jacob said, his words halting but heartfelt. He looked at the tiny family, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and responsibility. Despite the joy of naming the puppies, the days that followed were far from easy. Solace needed special care to regain her strength. Jacob and Lyra took turns feeding her small meals throughout the day, ensuring she stayed hydrated and nourished. The puppies, though growing stronger, were still fragile and demanded constant attention. Jacob often found himself overwhelmed. His hands were clumsy, and his attempts to clean up after the puppies often ended in even bigger messes. One evening, as he tried to prepare a bottle of formula, the milk spilled across the counter, dripping onto the floor. "Ah, no," Jacob muttered, his frustration evident. He crouched down to clean the mess, only to have a curious puppy tumble into the puddle, tracking it across the floor. Lyra, who had just walked in, burst into laughter at the chaotic scene. "Jacob, I think you've got your hands full," she said, kneeling beside him to help clean up. Jacob gave her a sheepish smile. "Not good at this," he admitted. "You're doing better than you think," Lyra said, her tone encouraging. "They're happy, and they're safe. That's what matters." Her words settled something in Jacob. Though his actions often felt inadequate, the sight of Solace resting peacefully, or the puppies tumbling over one another, reminded him that his efforts weren't in vain. Amidst the challenges, there were moments of pure joy. Solace's strength returned little by little. Her coat began to regain its golden luster, and her tail wagged more often. She even began to play gently with her puppies, nudging them with her nose and pawing at them when they grew too rowdy. The puppies, now full of energy, turned Jacob's living room into their playground. They chased each other in circles, wrestled with old socks, and climbed over Jacob whenever he sat on the floor. One afternoon, as Jacob tried to repair a torn corner of the blanket, Faith pounced on his hand, her tiny teeth nibbling at his fingers. "Hey, stop that," Jacob said, his voice soft despite the sternness he tried to convey. He gently picked her up, cradling her in his hands. Her wide eyes stared back at him, and he felt his heart melt. Lyra often captured these moments on her camera, her skills as a photographer bringing out the warmth and tenderness of the scenes. She shared the photos with Jacob, who stared at them in awe. "Beautiful," he murmured, his voice slow but sincere. "They are," Lyra replied, though her gaze lingered on Jacob for a moment before returning to the puppies. As the days turned into weeks, Jacob began to feel a profound sense of connection, not just to Solace and her puppies, but to Lyra as well. She had become an integral part of their lives, her presence a constant source of guidance and reassurance. Together they shared the burdens and joys of caring for the little family. One evening, after the puppies had finally settled into sleep, Jacob and Lyra sat together on the couch, the room bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. Jacob glanced at Lyra, his hands fidgeting nervously. Thank you," he said, his words slow but earnest, "for everything." Lyra smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me, Jacob. You're the one who saved them." "Couldn't do it alone," Jacob replied. "Well," Lyra said, her eyes softening, "sometimes we're meant to face challenges with others. Solace needed you, but I think you needed her too." Jacob fell silent, her words resonating deeply. For so long he had lived with the belief that his struggles were his alone to bear. But now, surrounded by the warmth of new connections, both human and canine, he began to see that there was strength in leaning on others. As Solace's recovery continued, so did Jacob's. Though he still stumbled through his words and fumbled with the details of caring for the puppies, he felt a newfound sense of purpose. Solace and her pups had brought life into his quiet home, filling it with joy and chaos. And Lyra had brought something he hadn't felt in years: companionship. For Jacob, the journey of recovery was no longer just Solace's, it was his too. Together with Lyra by his side, he began to embrace the challenges of each day, finding solace in the small victories and comfort in the shared moments. The road ahead was uncertain, but Jacob no longer feared it. They had come this far together, and he knew, deep in his heart, that they would face whatever came next as a family. The puppies were growing fast. Their tiny frames, once fragile and trembling, had transformed into bundles of boundless energy. Jacob Walker's once quiet home had become a lively playground filled with their excited yips and the constant sound of tiny paws scurrying across the floor. Each day brought new adventures for the little golden retrievers, tumbling over each other, gnawing on old socks, and chasing imaginary prey. Jacob, watching them with a mix of pride and exhaustion, realized the time had come to find them permanent homes. His house, though warm and welcoming, was too small for 6 growing puppies. They needed space to roam, families to love them, and homes where they could thrive. Though the thought of letting them go filled Jacob with a sense of loss, he knew it was what was best for them. Lyra Hale, ever the planner, took the lead. As a photographer with a passion for animals, she knew exactly how to present the puppies to potential adopters. "They need to be seen for who they are," she said, camera in hand. One by one, she captured each puppy's personality. Bliss with her mischievous grin, Faith's shy but curious gaze, Valor's proud stance, Grace's serene posture, Hope's quiet determination, and Halo's gentle playfulness. The photos were heartwarming, each one telling a story of survival and joy. "These pictures will melt anyone's heart," Lyra said, showing Jacob the shots. Jacob nodded, his smile soft. "They deserve the best." With Lyra's help, detailed profiles were created for each puppy and shared with the community. It didn't take long for inquiries to pour in. Families from Maple Hollow and neighboring towns reached out, eager to provide loving homes. Jacob and Lyra carefully screened each potential adopter, ensuring the puppies would be cared for and cherished. The first goodbye came sooner than Jacob had expected. Bliss was adopted by a young couple with 2 energetic children who couldn't wait to shower her with love. Jacob stood by the door, his heart heavy as the family left with Bliss bounding happily alongside them. "She'll be happy," Jacob murmured to Lyra, more to reassure himself than anything else. "She will," Lyra said gently, placing a comforting hand on his arm. Over the following days, the other puppies also found their homes. Valor went to a retired firefighter, whose calm yet active lifestyle matched the pup's adventurous spirit. Faith and Grace were adopted together by a family who loved the idea of keeping siblings united. Halo, with her angelic demeanor, was welcomed by an elderly widow longing for companionship. Each farewell was bittersweet. Jacob watched with quiet pride as the families left, knowing the puppies were heading to safe and loving homes. Yet the growing quiet in his house left a void he couldn't ignore. When only hope remained, Jacob realized he couldn't let her go. From the beginning, she had been special, a calm presence, always staying close to her mother, Solace. Her watchful eyes and steady demeanor reminded Jacob of everything they had been through together. "I can't," Jacob said one evening as Lyra prepared an adoption listing for Hope. "She belongs here." Lyra smiled knowingly. "I had a feeling you'd say that." And so Hope stayed. Alongside Solace, she became a permanent part of Jacob's life, a symbol of resilience, faith, and the unexpected joy that had entered his world. As the days turned into weeks, something extraordinary began to happen. Jacob noticed small changes in himself. Words that once caught in his throat now came more easily. His sentences, once broken and halting, began to flow. At first he thought it was his imagination, but the improvements were undeniable. One crisp morning, as Jacob stood on the porch calling for Solace and Hope to come inside, the words left his mouth effortlessly. "Come on, girls," he said aloud, pausing in disbelief. The dogs bounded toward him, their tails wagging, but Jacob barely noticed. He ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. Had he just spoken without stumbling? Without pausing? Jacob knelt beside Solace, resting a hand on her golden fur. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude. When he shared the news with Lyra, she was astonished. "Jacob," she said, tears in her eyes, "this is incredible. It's like a miracle." Jacob nodded slowly. "I think it is. Maybe it's God's way of reminding me to trust in His plan." From that moment on, Jacob embraced his renewed ability with quiet awe. Though his speech had once been a barrier, it now flowed with a newfound confidence. To Jacob, it was more than just a recovery. It was a gift, a reminder of the grace and kindness that had carried him through his struggles. With solace and hope by his side, Jacob found himself drawn to a new purpose. He began volunteering at the local animal shelter, sharing his story and helping other rescued animals find homes. Lyra often joined him, her camera capturing moments of connection and hope. Together they became a team, united by their shared love for animals and the faith that had guided them through their journey. Jacob's home, once quiet and solitary, now overflowed with life. Solace, ever loyal, followed him wherever he went, her golden coat shining with health. Hope, playful yet grounded, filled the house with joy. And Lyra, with her warmth and determination, brought a sense of companionship Jacob hadn't felt in years. One evening, as Jacob sat on the porch watching Solace and Hope play in the yard, he reflected on how much had changed. The bitter cold night when he found Solace felt like a lifetime ago, yet its memory remained vivid. "They saved me," he murmured to himself, his voice clear and steady, "just as much as I saved them." With Lyra by his side and his newfound family at his feet, Jacob knew one thing for certain. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The bond between Jacob Walker and Solace, the golden retriever who had brought light back into his life, grew stronger with each passing day. Solace's presence, alongside her pup Hope, transformed Jacob's once quiet home into a haven of joy and warmth. Inspired by the resilience and love Solace embodied, Jacob began to dream of creating something greater, something that would honor the journey they had shared and the lives they had saved together. One crisp autumn evening, Jacob sat on the porch with Solace resting at his feet. Her golden coat shimmered faintly in the fading light as she napped peacefully. Lyra Hale, now a constant part of his life, was nearby, her camera in hand as she captured a playful moment between Hope and a falling leaf. Her laughter mingled with the soft rustling of the trees, and Jacob felt a rare sense of contentment. "Lyra," Jacob began, his voice steady and clear, a far cry from the halting speech of his past, "I've been thinking." Lyra lowered her camera and turned to him, curiosity lighting up her face. "About what?" "A sanctuary," he said, his gaze drifting to Solace, "for animals like her, for the ones no one else will help." Lyra's face softened and she moved to sit beside him. "A sanctuary? Jacob, that's a beautiful idea." "I want to call it Solace's Haven," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion. "She deserves it." Lyra placed a hand on his arm, her eyes shining. "Not just her, Jacob. Every animal deserves what you gave her: hope, love, and a second chance." Jacob and Lyra shared their vision with the Maple Hollow community, and the response was overwhelming. The people who had supported Jacob during Solace's treatment and the families who had adopted her puppies rallied together to help bring the sanctuary to life. Donations poured in, money, materials, and offers of labor. Lyra's photography captured the spirit of the mission, her images of Solace and her puppies reminding everyone of the power of compassion. Jacob, once hesitant to speak, now became the voice of the project. He shared his story with heartfelt conviction, his words resonating with people far and wide. Each time he recounted the night he found Solace, the room grew quiet and tears filled the eyes of those listening. The land for the sanctuary was donated by a local family moved by Solace's story. Construction began in earnest, with Jacob at the forefront, working alongside volunteers to build the haven he had envisioned. Solace and Hope often accompanied him to the site, their presence a constant reminder of the sanctuary's purpose. 2 years later, Solace's haven was complete. The sanctuary was more than a shelter. It was a place of healing, education, and connection. It featured spacious enclosures, a veterinary clinic, a training facility, and quiet gardens where visitors could bond with the animals. A plaque at the entrance read, "In honor of Solace, who taught us the power of love and second chances." The grand opening of Solace's Haven was a day of joy and unity. The sun shone brightly over Maple Hollow as families, volunteers, and community members gathered to celebrate. Among them were the families who had adopted Solace's puppies, each bringing their now-grown dogs to the event. The joyful reunions were filled with laughter, wagging tails, and happy barks. Jacob stood at the podium, his hands resting on the wood as he surveyed the crowd. For a moment he hesitated, the weight of the journey hitting him all at once. Then he began to speak. "Solace came into my life on a cold winter night," he said, his voice steady and clear. "She was broken, scared, and hungry. But she didn't give up. Her strength and love saved not only her puppies, but me too. Solace's haven is her legacy, a place where every animal will know they are loved, just as she taught me to love." The crowd erupted in applause as Jacob stepped down, his heart full. Lyra joined him, slipping her hand into his. Together they watched as the sanctuary, once just a dream, came to life around them. The celebration also marked another milestone, the union of Jacob and Lyra. Over the years, their shared journey of caring for Solace and building the sanctuary had brought them closer. Under the spring sun, surrounded by the sanctuary's animals and the people who had supported them, they exchanged vows. Solace, now in her twilight years, lay contentedly at Jacob's feet during the ceremony. Hope, her pup and constant companion, sat beside her, wagging her tail as if sensing the joy of the occasion. The sanctuary thrived in the years that followed, becoming a beacon of hope for countless animals in need. Solace, though slowing with age, remained a guiding presence. She often lay in the sanctuary's quiet gardens, watching over the newcomers with her calm, understanding gaze. Her story became a symbol of resilience and the transformative power of love. Jacob and Lyra dedicated themselves to expanding the sanctuary's reach. They implemented programs for community outreach, animal therapy, and responsible pet care education. Each initiative carried the spirit of Solace, whose name had become synonymous with hope and healing. As Solace's health began to fade, Jacob ensured her final days were filled with peace and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob sat beside her under the tree that bore her name. "You've done so much," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave me everything. Rest now, Solace. We'll carry your legacy." Solace lifted her head slightly, her soulful eyes meeting Jacob's for one last silent moment of understanding. With a soft sigh, she closed her eyes and passed away peacefully. Solace's passing was marked by a heartfelt memorial. A tree was planted in her honor at the center of the sanctuary, its branches stretching toward the sky. Beneath it, a stone bore the inscription, "Solace, a life that gave hope to many." Jacob, Lyra, and the community vowed to continue her legacy. Solace's haven grew to become a model sanctuary, its influence spreading far beyond Maple Hollow. Families from across the country visited, drawn by the sanctuary's mission and the story of the dog who had inspired it all. One evening, as Jacob walked through the sanctuary with Hope trotting beside him, he paused beneath Solace's tree. The sunset bathed the haven in golden light, and Jacob felt a deep sense of peace. "You taught me everything," he said quietly, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "And because of you, so many will know love." Hope nuzzled his hand, her golden coat shining in the fading light. Jacob smiled, feeling the presence of Solace in the gentle rustle of the leaves. Her legacy, he knew, would endure in every life touched by the sanctuary's love and compassion. As Jacob stood beneath the tree planted in Solace's honor, the gentle rustle of its leaves seemed to whisper a message of peace and hope. Solace's journey, from a cold, abandoned warehouse to the heart of a sanctuary, was a testament to the transformative power of love and faith. Her story wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption, about how one act of kindness, guided by grace, can ripple out to touch countless lives. Jacob often thought of the words, "Let all that you do be done in love." Solace had embodied that love in every moment, showing resilience in the face of adversity and trust in the goodness of others. Through her, Jacob found his voice, his purpose, and a deeper understanding of God's plan. This story reminds us that love fueled by faith can bring extraordinary change. Solace may have been just one dog, but her impact inspired a community to build something far greater, a sanctuary of hope and kindness. Let Solace's journey encourage us all to be instruments of love and compassion. Whether through a simple act of kindness or a helping hand, we reflect God's grace when we show care for others. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How has faith or an act of kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. We'd be honored to read it. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others. Let's spread the message of hope, love, and the beauty found in second chances. May God's love fill your heart today and always, guiding you to bring light to those who need it most. Together, let's honor Solace's legacy by living with compassion, faith, and unwavering hope.